Boy calls 911. When officer sees his bedroom, he steps in and helps. Officer Alex Jones follows Cameron to his bedroom. His door, where most boys would have a keep out sign hanging, was covered in scratch marks and pigments of paint were falling off. The officer pushes the door forward, but it's cold to the touch, stealing the heat from his warm fingers. Sweat trickles down the officer's forehead and lands on his crisp blue uniform. But just as he goes to wipe the sweat away, the door opens and Officer Jones has a terrible feeling hit the pit of his stomach. He's never seen anything like this before. Officer Alex Jones has been a police officer for a decade. There were times where his job was rewarding, but it was also dangerous. Despite this, it was in his duty to protect and serve the people of his small town. Yes, with 10 years on the job, Officer Jones thought he'd seen it all. Until now, that is. Officer Jones walks into the station armed with a fresh coffee and a fresh blueberry muffin his wife baked. As he got ready to start his shift, he nestled himself into his chair. But then a call came through, piercing the silence lingering in the air of the station. The call was from a little boy called Cameron, and it sounded like he needed help. The officer races into his car and drives over the address of Cameron. All the worst-case scenarios run through his mind as he speeds across town to help this little boy. Despite the traffic, the officer got there within 15 minutes. As he pulls up to the house, he can feel his pulse pounding. Surely it wasn't too late. As Officer Jones got out of his car in the hazy heat of the August sun, he notices a little boy sat on his front porch of the house. That must be Cameron. The officer makes his way over to the boy, the house reflected in his overly large sunglasses, to discuss what had happened. But Officer Jones never could have predicted what would happen next. "My mom wouldn't let me play my video game," the boy revealed coyly. Despite his answer, Officer Jones' police instincts kicked in. The boy looked uneasy. Was this the genuine reason he called? It looked like something else was bothering him. The officer thought there was more to the story, and he was so right. Officer Jones asked the boy to show him his room, and the boy hesitantly agrees. His mom out of the house says she was just round her neighbor's house dropping off some food. The officer steps inside his house, eager to find out some answers. And straight away an uneasy feeling hit him in the pit of the stomach. The house was pretty much empty. There was hardly any furniture, and it looked like they'd just moved in. But Cameron and his family had been in this house for a few months now. So where were the framed family photos? The height chart on the wall, scribbled in crayon? The box of toys? From that moment then, it began to dawn on Officer Jones that there might be more behind the cry for help than a trivial argument between the boy and his mother. Officer Jones follows Cameron to his room, his heartbeat pounding like a big bass drum. Cameron pushes the door, which had scratch marks all over it, and tells Officer Jones to come in. But as soon as the officer did, he was lost for words. There's no way a boy could live like this. Stepping foot into his room, Officer Jones felt a chill up his spine. Cameron didn't have a bed or anything else in the room, apart from a black garbage bag holding his clothes. How could a child live like this? And more importantly, why was he living like this? Officer Jones knew he needed to find out the truth. It turned out that the boy's mom had been struggling since moving to South Carolina from Texas as she looked after an unwell relative. The unfortunate situation resonated with Officer Jones, and he knew he needed to take action. But the family had no idea what was coming next. A few days passed, and Officer Jones kept in touch with Cameron via phone. There's no way Officer Jones could let this boy carry on living how he's been living for the past few months. But this officer had a trick up his sleeve, and it was a trick that would leave the boy and his family lost for words. Officer Jones pulls up to the Cameron's house in a truck. He gets out of the vehicle and makes his way to the front door. He knocks and Cameron opens it. "Hey, Cameron," the officer says in a friendly tone. "Look at this," he says, before pointing behind him. Cameron looks behind the officer, and the boy bursts into tears when he sees what's in the officer's truck. The truck was carrying presents and gifts that were all bought by the officer. You see, the officer had intention to finally fill up the space in Cameron's room. Among other things, Cameron received a new bed as well as a chair, a desk, and a television. But the surprises didn't end there. Cameron also received a brand new games console. Couldn't believe how kind a stranger could be, especially a cop. It's safe to say that Cameron is now happy and content in his new room. And it just goes to show it doesn't hurt to be kind.